and welcome to tonight's interview. We have special guest Joe Siccardi. Joe Siccardi has been an editorial writer, editor, and publisher for 52 years. As he states, I'm the ordinary Joe walking along this journey called life and sharing it with you. He is the proud father of 5 children, 18 grandchildren, and 3 great-granddaughters. You can connect with his 3 books on his website, wisdomfromafather.com, to include Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Goodreads. Welcome, Joe Siccardi.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to interview you. I'm definitively excited, especially, 52 years of editing and publisher experience. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, that sounds like an amazing journey.
Well, you know, it was an amazing journey. I never intended to be a writer. When I was in high school, I was calling in scores to the local newspaper. After I graduated, there was a job opening to receive the scores. And I started working at the old Patterson News in New Jersey. Next thing I know, I started a career.
Well, that sounds, it's kind of interesting how you can kind of fall into something like that. That kind of happened to me within my current profession. I'm actually a training developer. My day job, I'm a training developer. So what I did was I took my love of writing, okay, and developing training and coaching, and that's how I got my day job as being a training developer at a school. So what I do is I write courses that instructors teach at the school. Pretty interesting opportunity there. So it sounds like you've taken your love of writing and working within that environment and took advantage of that opportunity as well too.
Exactly. Like I said, I've always enjoyed writing. I'd much rather write an essay on a test rather than multiple choice or give a one-word answer. I guess I like to embellish.
Yeah. So how has that worked out for you in the editing process? I know that, being an editor, and a publisher, you're really kind of that, I guess, that safeguard between what gets out to the public. What has that been like for you? I mean, have you really had to take a good look at some other people's writing and say, hey, this is good, this is bad? How's that experience worked out for you?
Well, as an editor, that's what you constantly do. You're reading other people's work. Mm-hmm. My goal, my focus as an editor was never to change their work, but to make it more readable.
Yeah.
Following the norms of whatever publication we happen to be at, make sure that they follow the styles and et cetera. But I think often what happens with editing is editors will take a person's work and twist it.
Yeah.
It kind of loses what the focus of what they're trying to say.
Right.
So I don't look as an editor for all the time that I was editing. I never looked at it as a judgment type of a position.
Mm-hmm.
I always tried to use it as a mentoring position.
Yeah.
So work with the person, with my writers, and say, this would have been better if you had taken this approach, or that lead that you have down here in paragraph 4 could have been up in paragraph 1. So those types of things, but not just do it, but explain why. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, having that experience, you definitely have a lot of mentorship to offer to the team and everything. And I know how important that is because myself, I'm a nonfiction writer. I write books that are about leadership, primarily about leadership and mentorship and coaching. So I know how important that is. One of the greatest quotes ever was by John Maxwell, where he said, everything rises and falls on leadership. Okay. And being in the position that you're in, you definitely offer that leadership. You definitely offer that mentorship. And, it's very important to have that. So how important is editing to you?
It's everything. There isn't anything that I write myself that I don't give to somebody else to read. It's important to have another set of eyes. I think it's important to have somebody say, what did you mean? We wrote that. No matter what the venue is, whether it's newspaper writing, short stories, whether it's a blog, it doesn't matter. Some should always read what you've written, not with the intent of changing anything, but with the intent of improving.
You know, it's interesting. So whenever you go through that process, do you tend to ask some really tough questions? You know, I think probably the hardest question that you can ask somebody is why? Why did you do that? You know, so when you go through and you not necessarily challenge someone, but when you question, you know, what are some important questions that you tend to ask during that editing process?
Well, the first question I ask is, what are you trying to say?
Ah, okay.
It depends on the venue. Obviously, in the newspaper business, you want it to be accurate. But the evolution of the business is one from you're writing a story about an event that happened last night. You're writing a story for an event that's happening now. How you approach it, and there are a lot of writers who don't understand the subtleties of that. We used to call it first day leads and second day leads in the newspaper business. And as a second day lead, it would always be, okay, what was the most important thing that happened, but why?
Okay.
Implications of what happened. And that's true for nonfiction and fiction as well.
Yeah.
You have to know what your audience is, who your audience is. You have to know what you're writing about. It has to flow. You know, in the books that I wrote, I can't tell you how many times I've gone through the drafts. I mean, you start somewhere and you just keep going and going and going.
Yeah. I was like, so is there such a thing as too much editing?
I'm going to qualify that and say yes and no.
Okay.
There comes a point in time where you have to say enough is enough, and you have to do something with it.
Not necessarily just settle with it, but you know, like what you said, enough is enough. This is good enough, or is as good as it's going to get, or you know, leave something else. I can get the point.
This is as good as. Now that being said, I've been rereading my latest book, and I found a couple of places where I said I wish I would have said something a little bit different. So as I revise it, I will make those changes. Not because I was unhappy with what I originally wrote. I just think it could be better. Yeah.
So, so you have 3 books out. Tell me a little bit about each of your books.
Okay, the first book, Heaven Shining Through. I had this wild idea to write a community novel with my readers at both my newspaper and on my blog. And I gave them an opening paragraph, and I said, let's have some fun with it, see where it goes. And as long as there's interest, keep building on it. Well, there was interest, and there was interest, but I noticed that my numbers were going up, the likes were going up, the follows were going up, but I wasn't getting the input back.
Right.
Numbers were going up. I said, well, okay, I'll keep going with it, and we'll see where this goes. So about week 3, I put the note out there that it was time to come up with a lead character. And one of the readers did come back and say, I think the lead character should be Samantha. So that immediately created a problem because I'm not a Samantha. I figured that, okay, as we go along, somebody will help contribute to this storyline. And we went through it for 26 weeks with nobody contributing except myself. And what I did each week would be another little scene in the story. About week 6 or 7, I realized that this was going to be my story. You know, I was just going to develop it the way I thought it should be developed. And that's what I did. So that was Heaven Shining Through. After it was posted, I stuck it in the back, in the archives, and was still shuttling back and forth with with my newspaper between New York and Maine. But when I got up to Maine, I live in a nice small town that shuts down about 7 o'clock. And since I wasn't here full time, I didn't have cable and the distractions that were out there. So there wasn't a lot to do at night. So I went back and I looked at it and I started working on it and, fixing it and turning it from 26 individual chapters into a cohesive novella. That was the story of Heaven Shining Through. It was received well. It had some initial punch to it, but one of the common themes from reviewers was that it was too short. It wasn't, but the question was, this could have been a novel. It could have been developed more. You could do a lot of different things with it, and despite what my wife may have ever said, I do listen. So I started working on turning it into a novel.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this right here. I know that, there's a lot of different approaches towards writing a book, in reference to like, I have to have so many chapters before I stop. I have to have so many words before I stop. And earlier you mentioned where enough is enough. So for you in writing your books, what was like your point that, hey, this is enough? Was it a word count, a chapter count? Okay, the story just closed itself. What was that process like for you?
The story just closed itself.
Okay.
I didn't go into it with any preconceived notions at all. I decided that I was just going to write it and develop it, and then when I got to the end, it was going to be the end. I don't even know what the word count is on the first one. It was relatively short. It was only.
I didn't count either. I know one of my books was 166 pages, and that's just where it fell. And when I left it, well enough alone, I was like, okay, what I had to say is what I had to say, and there it is.
Right.
And I know a lot of authors that are out there. They get really bent around. Oh, my book has 49,000 words or something like that. Because I know there's a few contests, especially like NaNoWriMo, I think is one that's out there. But there's a few, there's this big notion of, well, I got to have, 75,000 words or whatever, or, so many chapters. It's very interesting to hear everybody's version of, what completes a book. And,
but I don't have, I never had any, except in the newspaper business, because, we're vying for space. So if I told a reporter I needed 500 words, they better give me 500 words or somewhere near that.
right.
Not go on and on and on. But as a writer, I don't put any constraints on myself. Wherever it goes, it goes. But I did develop, my name is Sam, off of the first book, Heaven Shining Through. In fact, the subtitle of it, and Heaven is Still Shining Through. So they're tied together, but it is actually a standalone book.
Oh, okay. So they're not a part of a series or anything like that.
No. The novel is an extension of the book. The novel actually contains a lot of the scenes that were in the original book, just in a different format. Once I started writing it, I realized that I thought it would have more of an impact if I made it into a memoir, a fictional memoir, but a memoir rather than a story.
Right.
So I had to juggle some things around to make that type of a novel, of a hybrid.
Right. Well, that's the really good thing about being an author. You can write the book that you want to read or you want to be read. And you can kind of twist things around here and there. Kind of like how you said it was like a memoir, kind of like, but with a twist, so to speak. I think that's interesting how there's so many opportunities out there to write stories from so many different perspectives. It kind of leads to opportunities to have, like, here's the version, here's the pre-version, here's the post-version. It really kind of seems like, writing can really take on so many shapes and forms. There's really lots of opportunity out there. So do you actually see yourself writing a series, or maybe like a prequel or something along those lines?
I haven't gone that far yet. I mean, I obviously will do some more writing,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure what direction is, whether it'll be an extension, another extension of what I have, or another different facet of where I was, make it into a series. Um, uh, but the hardest part about the novel is that I had the nucleus, I had the story in mind,
Mhm.
coming up with a beginning and an end. Where do I begin it and where do I end it? And the ending was the most challenging part, and I think that was also the most fulfilling part.
Okay. That sounds interesting. I know, a lot of times I know authors. So I'll give an example. I know myself, I'm a nonfiction writer, but I've dabbled in writing, or at least trying to write fiction. And I can get started like amazingly well. Like, okay, here's a great concept. Here's a great introduction. I got the first chapter out of the way. I know what the end looks like, but just bridging that gap in between the start and the finish seems to be the hardest part for authors, I think, sometimes. It makes me wonder how many unfinished works are just sitting around in somebody's basement waiting to be unleashed into the world. Do you have anything like that exists?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any unfinished projects or unfinished like ideas or anything like that that's just sitting around?
I have a million of them, but most of them are in my head. I haven't written them down. The But it's fun. I just finished a writing class, writing class, and the one thing that I stress to them is that we all have a voice, we all have something to say,
Right.
and we all approach things differently. And as long as you're satisfied with what you're writing, that you're the number one audience. You have to, for yourself. You have to be comfortable that what you've written reflects what you want to say. So, I went through an exercise where I would give them a word and tell them to write for 5 minutes on that word. And, we had 10 participants in the class, and we had 10 different takes on the same word.
That's a great exercise. So I love writing prompts. I love paraphrasing, and I love being able to. So I actually wrote a book called Leadership Is. And basically what I did was I took 50 words and I wrote about those words. So that's a great exercise. I mean, I'm going to turn that into a series. That's really going to be something really neat here pretty soon. But to be able to take a thought or an idea or just a concept and then embellish upon it, that's an amazing skill to have. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, I agree with it 100%. When I saw it, and I see it, I do participate in 5 Minute Friday, which is a prompt every week. I just see the diversity that comes out, the diversity of thought, where the individual circumstances that writers are in shine through the words that they put through, even though they're working on a specific word. So I think that was the highlight of my teaching career when I taught that class, is seeing how that all came together. I mean, when I first approached the class about it in week one, they were a little reticent. And they didn't know, what am I going to write for 5 minutes? And then it became only 5 minutes, that type of thing. So I
You got excited about it, huh?
Yeah, they did. They did a good job with it.
That's interesting. So did you ever like swap papers around or ideas around? Like somebody started something, you take that, hand it to somebody else, and hey, you take this and run?
Well, ironically, that was the last class.
Oh, okay.
We had them choose a book title. We had the books, split them in half, and then they would try to mix and match of them. And so it was like Lord of the Geishas.
Yeah.
That type of thing. And then I'd have them write a lead paragraph and hand it off to somebody else, and then have to write something, a continuation, and they'd turn it to somebody else who would have to develop the characters and talk about dialogue, and in there, and I made them write a poem somewhere in the exercise and then wrap it up. But none of them started with their own paper. They all had somebody else's thoughts, and that is a challenge. I mean, I've done that myself.
I get it. I'm a certified instructor, so I had to take somebody else's lesson plan and teach it without really knowing about it. So basically, we had all the lesson plans together. Here you go. Here's your lesson plan. You got 5 minutes to look at it. Now you got to get in front of the class and teach it. I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do here? I get the concept. I really do. It's really tough to be able to take something like that and then stand up and just shine with it. And like you know what you're talking about, like you've been doing it for 20 years. So there's definite challenges in that. I can truly understand that. So how important is paraphrasing to you?
It depends on the situation. I don't think it's not high on my list.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But at the same time, it's a tool. It's just another tool in the toolbox.
Right. I mean, I think it's a good skill to have to be able to paraphrase. And one of the drills that I used to do when I used to teach writing was I was like, okay, I want you to take this sentence. I mean, you know the concept. Take this sentence and I want you to rewrite this 5 different ways. Because I strongly believe that one idea should lead to at least 10 good ideas. And if it doesn't lead to 10 good ideas, well, then it's not a very good idea. Maybe 3 to 5, you can work with that. But once again, that's the whole concept of paraphrasing. Able to take something, shape it into something completely different. And I kind of wonder how many stories or even songs for that matter, because I also write songs, would have been differently based off of, the art of paraphrasing or the skill of paraphrasing. So I think paraphrasing is a pretty important skill, depending on how you use it, though.
Right. It depends on how you use it and what you're using it for. When I was writing early in my career, I was in sports, and in addition to the Patterson News, I wrote for a couple of other newspapers as well. And obviously, I would cover the game. I cover a football game, for example. So you have one set of facts, but it had to be presented differently, different audiences, depending on where it was going. So, I understand completely what you're saying about paraphrasing, writing 2 or 3 different stories. The root is the same, but you're constantly, it has to constantly change. So that's important. And
so what are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen writers make, and how exactly did you correct those mistakes?
I think the most common that I've seen are not context issues.
Okay.
I see a lot of people who will talk about people and say that instead of who.
Okay.
Because you're talking about people.
Right.
And obviously the spelling and the there.
I noticed that. So it's interesting that you say that you use the word that, because I notice a shift in usage of words, especially watching the news. I don't really watch much TV, but I noticed a shift when I did watch news, how the word that has started to get used quite often, like that house, that car, that whatever. So I noticed that being a really common word that really started to get used a lot here lately within the news. Not lately, but over a period of time. And so I know that being descriptive within your writing is very important. So what is your process like whenever you're trying to describe something, whether it's a room, a scene, a situation, a color, a smell? Explain description for me.
My goal with description is to paint a picture in my reader's mind.
Okay.
That they are there, experiencing along with me. So I try to be as descriptive as I possibly can. Sometimes I'm over descriptive, but you just get carried away at times. But But
Yeah.
then, it isn't enough to say the car.
Right.
Is it the blue car? Is it the big blue car? Is it the big blue Cadillac?
Right.
Those types of things, which paint different pictures. I mean, it's a different picture if you say the blue Cadillac and the blue Volkswagen.
Right. Exactly.
It paints a different picture in your mind. So I've always tried to instill in my writers to be as descriptive as they can.
Mhm.
But it's interesting you mentioned the word that. I personally think that the word has become overused, not as a that car type of thing, but it's being used as a bridge. You really don't need. So I've been conscious of that. I would always redline those out, or as much as I can. Sometimes the word that can be changed by a comma.
Right.
Instead of that, because it gets to be used over and over and over again. And
Right. Yeah, I noticed that. And for me, here's what I've kind of noticed within that particular word. I've kind of noticed that it had a negative connotation to it, especially within the news, because I know when that word is used within a news broadcast, usually they say that, kind of like in a negative connotation when they're talking about something. So for me, I've always found that word really interesting, especially how it's used. And I know that particular words can take on different meanings depending on how you use them. It could shape and reshape a different perspective, and I think you got a good point there, about how important words are and how it can shape, how it can basically lead to a perspective. All right. So, all right, shifting gears here a little bit. Marketing and social media. I want to talk a little bit about marketing strategies and social media and everything. I know that there's so many opportunities out there in which to market a book, promote a book, and I kind of want to get your take on what strategies you've used and how they've been successful for you.
Well, I had almost no strategy for the first book. I relied heavily on the publisher, and I did discover that, as an author, I have a vested interest in what's out there. So I found myself writing more of the press releases and more of the distributing pieces that go out.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a very small social media following, and I had a very small. I still, relatively speaking, I still have a relatively small one. Even a personal contact, if you will, is not extensive. And I think the conventional wisdom in book publishing is to have a good platform with a lot of names. And I think the reason for it is there's a justification for, you're only going to reach a certain segment of the audience. So the more names you have, the higher chances are you're going to get a higher number of responses.
Yeah.
I know people who, you probably have more experience than I do. You go on Twitter or Facebook, and you're looking for a 10,000 follower. Well, having 10,000 followers and having 10,000 readers are two different things.
Yeah, they definitely are.
So
I don't really get bent around the axle on numbers, so to speak, because numbers really don't tell the entire picture. For me, I look for engagement, because you can have 10,000 followers and you make a post. In theory, you should have 10,000 likes on a post. But, a lot of times when you post something to 10,000 people, you might get, 1 like, 5 likes, maybe 1 share or reshare or whatever the case. I think that a lot of these platforms really control what's visible and what's not visible. So, that's a whole different conversation right there about social media and how they control this, that, and the other. For me, I look at social media as kind of arms and legs. And I think that the most important piece of land that any author can have is their website. And I know you have a website. So what has been your strategy for your website, and how have you used that, and what type of success have you seen with your website?
Probably not enough. My website is actually my blog post.
Okay.
That's where it all starts. Um, that's the heart of what I'm writing. And then as I post to the blog, it gets sent out to Twitter and to Facebook and other media.
So it automatically gets posted out whenever you do make I guess a post.
Yes.
Okay, that's pretty good.
So that's really the heart of it. I don't have a dedicated site.
Okay.
I mean, I do have two Facebook sites. I have a personal site and an author site.
Okay.
But whatever's on one is on the other.
And that's good to have because you need to differentiate between the two. And that's definitely a good strategy. So, what authors out there really influenced your writing?
I think I was most influenced by, believe it or not, the book Nicholas Nickleby. That was probably the first book that I read, and it just grabbed me. And I was young, and I probably read it half a dozen times. And more contemporarily, I like James Patterson, Tom Clancy. Mm-hmm. I'm not particularly fond of the horror genre, but I do like Stephen King. Of course, he's a main fellow, so one of these days I hope to run into him. But
yeah, it's interesting. Speaking of genres, I know that the internet and Amazon, they've really busted the roof wide open on for the independent market, or at least for authors to have a voice within the market with all these genres. So you got genres, subgenres, sub-subgenres, all these different twists and takes and this, that, and the other. So with your books, do you feel like they are appropriately, I'm going to use a big word here. I'm going to say it like I said, because sometimes I talk the way that I do, genreized. Okay. So do you feel that your book is in the right genre, or do you feel like you need to create a whole new genre for your books?
I think my books are typically nonconformist.
Okay. I wasn't expecting that.
For example, I look at the novel as a fictional memoir. Well, a memoir is one, it's under the biography, and it's about a real person, but it's a fiction.
Right.
It's sort of a hybrid, if you will. It's based on a Christian theme, but it's not really a Christian book. I mean, it's not intended to be read only by Christians. It's meant for the general audience, and it's a messy book at times as you go through life. With Wisdom from a Father, which is actually I did that one. That's nonfiction, and what I did was take 52 of my posts, early posts, and turned them into a book. And I did it quite honestly because I wanted to get my name out there more than some books. I wanted to build a niche for myself as an author.
I'll share a quick story with you. My first book was exactly like that as well, too. I basically took blog posts, rewrote, kind of paraphrased and rewrote and reshaped it into a book format. So that's, I share some of the same experience as you do as well, too, turning blog posts into a book. At the end of the day, if you can put it in a consumable format, anything can really go in a book.
Sure. But it ends up being 52 short stories.
Like a chicken soup for the soul kind of thing.
I'm sorry?
Kind of like a chicken soup for the soul kind of thing.
Yeah. But there again, it's not really a devotional, but it has that inspirational, I hope, that inspirational feel to it. So it doesn't really fit the mold or the categories that are out there, which has hurt the process. The first one was marketed as a Christian book, and half the population just tuned it right out because it was a Christian book. And then there was the devout Christians who thought it was too earthy. So, you know,
well, I guess you can't please everybody, but like you said earlier, you got to be able to please yourself first before you can.
that's right. And I'm proud of what I wrote. I mean, I don't mean that to self-grandiosement, but I'm glad it's out there.
Right.
You know, my goal for all of the books is that it touches one person, and they see the overall message come through the books.
You know, and that's all it really takes is one person. You know, you can change one person's life. Then I would say that you've probably accomplished a goal, or at least accomplished something if you change somebody's life with your book. You know, life is definitely a journey. It seems that you've been on quite a journey yourself, and you've definitely captured those within your books. At least it sounds like you did. You know, because I definitely I truly enjoy reading like self-help, professional development, leadership, you know, and a lot of that can kind of be, you know, encapsulated into, you know, a couple of different genres here. You know, it definitely seems like your books are very inspirational. So do you have anything, I think we talked about this earlier, but do you have anything that's currently in the works? Do you have a future project?
Well, I'm thinking of doing a volume 2 of Wisdom.
Okay.
I mean, over the years, I've written about 1,000 blog posts, so I think I could find another 50 to update. I'm thinking of that. I haven't thought beyond Sam, mainly because it was just released. It was just released at the end of June.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working on trying to get some traction for that.
Okay.
But you know, there's lots of ideas going in my head. You know, whether I would stick to the same genre or whether I would, you know, go a different route. I haven't really done yet.
So that's a good point right there. So what do you consider yourself? Do you consider yourself an author or a writer?
Wow. I would say I would consider myself more of a writer.
Okay.
Than an author. Being an author is nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice title. In fact, just today I was in the grocery store and somebody, you know, they just had a story in the paper about the book being released, and it was nice for somebody to come up to me and say, "Let's see, you've got a new book out."
Yeah.
Nice and fulfilling. But I still think that you know, an author is really first and foremost a writer.
I believe wholeheartedly as well too. So there's different opportunities, you know, and I know that a lot of people really kind of get bent around, well, I'm an author, well, I'm a writer. I was like, okay, well, a writer writes. You know what I'm saying? If you're not really writing, you're not really a writer. But there's different opportunities for writers, like you mentioned. Taking a blog post and putting that into book format, you know, that's a form of writing, but it's also becoming an author as well too, because you published a work that can be read by others. So there's that differentiation between, well, I wrote content, I put it into a format that is consumable, I published it, now I'm an author. So the two can kind of intertwine as well too. And I think a lot of people really kind of get confused. So when I ask that question, it really is a tough question. It's meant to be kind of, you know, it kind of gets you to thinking. But that's how I combine the two. I think that you got to have the best of both worlds in order to present content in a consumable way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you could share one golden nugget with a new or a young or even a more seasoned author out there, what would that golden nugget or what would be that good advice that you would share with somebody?
Don't expect to be rich.
That's an answer. I wasn't expecting that one, but
it's not a retirement plan.
Yeah.
Have fun with it. I think that's what I would tell would-be writers or would-be authors. Enjoy what you're doing. Write for yourself first, and then let the rest of it just fall into place.
Yeah. All right. Well, Joe, I want to thank you tonight for taking time out of your day and sharing your valuable experience and insight with me in the Author Teach community. I'm wishing you all the best and continued success. Once again, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, if you would like to connect with more from Joe Siccardi, you can do so by visiting his website, wisdomfromafather.com, or his social media profiles on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Goodreads. Until next time, keep writing that next bestseller, and I'll see you in the next video.